November 17th, 1990. A Saturday, the second day of firearms deer hunting season. 33-year-old Doug Estes headed out that afternoon with his stepson and a friend.
It's pretty hard to talk about. You know, your first child is kind of special.
Estes' stepson discovered the bodies.
They were not connected in any way together.
November 17th, 1990 was the perfect day to go for a hunt. But before they could score a game, the lives of Doug Estes and Jim Bennett were tragically cut short in Kalamazoo County, setting in motion a chain reaction that would span over 3 decades. 2 hunters were killed and 2 hunters were suspects. Amidst the enigma, a hidden clue lay dormant, holding the key to unlocking the mystery. What was that clue that could not be unearthed sooner? Why did it take so long for the investigators to uncover the truth? Kalamazoo County, Michigan. In the vibrant landscape of the 1990s, Kalamazoo County, Michigan was a place where hard work, strong relationships, and a shared commitment to progress defined the way of life. As of that period, the population of Kalamazoo County, Michigan, stood at 223,411. It was a melting pot of people with different aspirations. Against the backdrop of this dynamic county, the 1990s unfolded as a transformative decade, with one crime defining its history. The fateful day. It was November 17th, 1990, a rather warm day in Kalamazoo County. A group of hunters were on their way to catch a good game in the Fulton State Game Area. Among them were Bobby Brown and his stepfather, Doug Estes. The group decided to split up and thought that it was a good strategy, going in different directions. Doug, Bobby, and others were focused on hearing even the slightest of sounds to detect the deer's movement. Winter days were often quiet, so when the sound of 2 gunshots echoed, it caught the attention of the group and the nearby residents. Just a few minutes after it, Helen Knopfs, a local resident, and her son heard a car screech off into a ditch just down the road from her house. Was this a coincidence? Or could it be related to the shots that were recently fired? The timing and proximity could not have been a coincidence, but the fact remained that gunshots were not unusual in the area. Concerned and curious, Knopfs and her son approached the car and saw a man behind the steering wheel. Covered in sweat, he seemed nervous, and the look on his face was plain unfriendly. Knopfs thought he needed help, so she offered to call a tow truck for him, but he refused, saying that he ended up in the ditch because a deer had suddenly appeared and crossed the road. While the reason seemed genuine, after all, people used to come here and hunt deer, there was something amiss. He seemed to be in a hurry to leave, and Knopfs thought he was pretending to be calm, which was odd. She offered to call the police, but the man in the car was not at all seeking any help. He expressed disinterest in involving law enforcement, confident that someone else would fix his car, and just like that, he drove away. But the echoes of the gunshots were still fresh. Bobby Brown thought that his stepfather had caught the deer because the sound came from the direction he went. Almost excited to congratulate him, he went on in the same direction and found Doug lying on his back on the ground in a pool of blood.
The direction that Doug was hunting, I assumed he got a deer, so I decided I'd slowly walk back up.
It was such an unusual sight that the first thought Bobby could muster was if it was a prank that Doug was trying to play. As reality sunk in, he could not believe what he was looking at. But there had been 2 gunshots. It could have meant that Doug was shot twice. However, he had only 1 bullet wound. The other possibility was that someone really tried killing him by firing 2 simultaneous shots and missed one. But when Bobby looked around in a frantic state, his eyes landed on another thing that he could not believe. There was another body lying face down.
I started checking to see if Doug had a pulse, and he didn't. And I run over and rolled James Bennett over, and There was no sense in even feeling for a pulse on him.
He checked for Doug's pulse first, but there was no hope. So he quickly ran over to the other man's body and rolled him over, but he was clearly dead. There was nothing Bobby could do. He ran off to ask for some help and quickly informed the police. The stage was set for a thorough investigation by the police, who arrived promptly to scrutinize the unsettling events that unfolded on that fateful day. The officers confirmed the presence of the two bodies that Bobby had already informed them about. The first job at their hands was to identify the victims, and soon enough, the police knew who they were. Since Bobby had called the police, he had already identified his stepfather, Doug, and the other man was Jim Bennett, who was a nature lover and was on a solo hunt that day. Both Doug Estes and Jim Bennett were hit in the back at close range through their hunting licenses. The weird thing was that the men had been shot using different firearms. One theory was that they had shot each other somehow, mistaking each other as the deer they had been looking for. The first issue was that both of them had been shot in the back, so it was almost impossible for them to hit the mark. And the second inconsistency arose when ballistic tests showed that Jim's muzzle loader was fully loaded and Doug's gun was nowhere to be found at the site. But that was only the first stage of confusion. The case was assigned to now retired detective Bruce Wiersema and Sergeant Roy Ballard. Wiersema was overwhelmed by it as he was not experienced in homicide cases, let alone double homicide. The area had not even witnessed murder cases in a long time. However, Wiersema decided to be thorough with the details to ensure a proper procedure. As the investigation proceeded, they found out that Doug and Jim were strangers to each other.
They were not connected in any way together.
So two strangers who just happened to end up in the same area.
That's what it appeared to be.
They had gone out to hunt separately, and it was only a coincidence that they were both killed at the same time. The detectives were already clueless. What could have been the motive of the kill? Had the victims been acquaintances, a mutual friend could have been identified. But now that there was no connection between them, it was all the more difficult to understand the case. But all hope was not lost, as their suspicions started building on Bobby Brown, the stepson of one of the victims. The detectives initially believed that the killings occurred because the target was Jim. According to them, Bobby had planned to rob him, but the robbery went wrong, and somewhere along the way, Doug was killed too. The police suspected that since Bobby's plan did not work, he had to call the police.
I've waited a long time to meet you.
I know.
I'm Jan Estes. Pleased to meet you. Sorry, it has to be in this circumstances.
So I don't know what it looks like out there.
It just looks like a woods.
Yeah.
This is my son, Robert.
Hi,
Nice to
Robert.
meet you.
You were the one that found him, right?
But both Estes and Bennett's family believed that their loved one was not the main target, and Bobby's intentions and motives did not line up with the crime. No matter what the family said, the detective's suspicion radar was on alert. To look for any evidence that they had missed earlier, the police decided to search the crime site again and ask the neighbors if they heard or saw something suspicious that day. Sure enough, the neighbors had heard the gunshots, but the testimony given by Helen Knopfs provided a new angle to the story. She helped the officers create a composite sketch of the man whose car landed in the ditch. The mystery man was becoming a suspect, but there was no way to link him to the crime. So the detectives proceeded to talk to other neighbors. After thoroughly conversing with them and delving into their accounts, a new name emerged from the shadows: Jeff Titus. Born in 1952, Jeff Titus was the owner of the property right behind the Fulton State Game Area, where it shared a boundary. He served as a police officer in the U.S. Marine Corps and later worked in the security detail for President Richard Nixon. Later, he found employment as a security guard at a VA medical center. Alongside his professional pursuits, he enjoyed hunting and spending time outdoors, but he was protective of his property. He used to get mad when hunters used to wander into his estates. So, could Doug and Jim have angered Titus by crossing the border into his place? The question on the detectives' minds was, where was Titus at the time of the murder? When he was available in the evening of the same day, the detectives took him in for interrogation. As it turned out, Jeff Titus was on a deer hunting trip himself. He had gone off with a friend to an area near Battle Creek, more than 27 miles away from the Fulton Game State area, at the property of an elderly couple. After several hours, Titus and his friend went to Burger King and drove back home. That was the moment when the story started mixing up. The missing gun that belonged to Doug Estes had finally been found, fully loaded. It was with Titus. He said that he had found it about 30 yards away from the crime scene and thought to keep it after wiping it clean, so it could not be traced to someone else and no one could claim it. Although the discovery put Titus under the threat of a major suspicion, it proved that Doug and Jim hadn't killed each other, and someone else was responsible for their death. It definitely raised suspicions, but there was no way to prove if Titus's story was fake. And the most important fact was that he had a rock-solid alibi, so he was cleared. But the detectives knew something was not right. No matter how much they tried, the case seemed to get even more twisted. Ultimately, with no further leads or clues, the case went cold. In the year 2000, the double homicide case of Doug and Jim was reopened, and the case files were transferred to a new team of detectives led by now retired Sergeant Mike Werkema and Detective Mike Brown. They started their investigation of the case by revisiting the neighbors, rechecking the clues, and reconsidering the old suspects. And sure enough, their initial suspicion landed on Bobby Brown. After a lot of back and forth, he was cleared. So, if there were no leads and clues, and the main suspect was cleared, who had killed those men that day? It seemed like a simple answer in hindsight. But the cold case detectives took their time and finally decided that no matter what the initial officers believed, the killer had to be Jeff Titus. More than a decade had passed since the crime. The memories of the people were foggy, and their statements were different. It was proving to be more difficult than they had expected. However, the detectives soon came up with a plausible theory. It suggested that, on November 17, 1990, the day of the murders, Titus had departed from the hunting property he was initially and returned to his own adjoining property near the Fulton State Game area. This action was driven by his suspicion that unauthorized individuals might have trespassed onto his land. Subsequently, it was believed that he perpetrated the killings before making his way back to the property in the Battle Creek area and returning home with his friend. In 2001, Titus, a married man and a father, found himself under arrest following reports from his co-workers at the Veterans Affairs Hospital. They disclosed the same thing, that Titus disliked trespassing hunters during the deer hunting season. According to the detectives, it was a good enough motive. Moreover, his co-workers also alleged that he openly discussed and boasted about the killings. The trial of Jeff Titus was conducted in 2002, led by the now retired Kalamazoo County Assistant Prosecutor Scott Brower. Unfortunately, the passage of time had taken a toll on Titus's alibi witnesses, rendering them unable to provide a testimony in his favor. His neighbor, Helen Knopfs, came to the witness stand, but nothing about the mystery man in his car came up, and the original investigators who had thoroughly cleared Titus of any wrongdoing were not summoned to testify during the trial. So despite the prosecutors not contesting the credibility of Titus's alibi, he was convicted and sentenced to 2 life terms in prison without the possibility of parole. He was incarcerated at Lakeland Correctional Facility in Coldwater, Michigan. But this story was far from over. During Titus's legal defense, led by attorney William Fett, a notable addition to the team was Howard Swabash, a recently retired polygraph examiner from the Michigan State Police. It was revealed that Swabash had been hired as a private investigator by Fett. The court records indicated that Swabash's wife initiated divorce proceedings in January 2002, merely 5 weeks after Titus was charged with murder. The allegations of marital infidelity caused the marital breakdown of their marriage, although the identity of the other woman involved was kept hidden. On the eventful Halloween day of October 31, 2002, 3 months after Titus's conviction by a jury, his wife Julie paid him a visit at Saginaw Prison, accompanied by their daughter and the private investigator Swabash. Julie informed Titus that she intended to file for divorce as they had not gotten along for years. The public records indicated that Swabash and Titus's ex-wife Julie eventually married in Florida in April 2005, merely 3 years after Titus's conviction, marking a surprising turn of events that raised questions about their connection and its potential impact on the case. Retired Sergeant Roy Ballett, who served with the Kalamazoo County Sheriff's Office, played a significant role in the initial investigation that led to Titus being cleared of suspicion in 1990. Ballett, feeling perplexed and dissatisfied with the course of events, confronted Swabash, the investigator, at the Kalamazoo County Courthouse shortly after Titus's conviction. Ballett expressed his disappointment, questioning why Swabash had not even bothered to contact him to discuss his insights and sentiments regarding the case, particularly if he had taken on the role of investigating to establish Titus's innocence. Neither Ballett nor the other original detective was called as witnesses by the defense. They would have provided crucial testimony regarding Titus's alibi. The confrontation grew heated, with Swabash responding in a confrontational manner and using inappropriate language. He abruptly departed, leaving Ballett to reflect on the encounter. In an interview conducted over the phone from prison, Titus openly wondered if this defense team's private investigator had been truly committed to serving his interests. He said, "It's a shocker, and then I wonder, was he working for me? Was he working for an ulterior motive? I don't know." Titus consistently maintained his innocence throughout the entire course of events. However, it was a pivotal moment when Bruce Wiersama and Roy Ballett, the two detectives involved in the initial investigation, made a public announcement, expressing their willingness to testify in support of Titus's alibi. This development caught the attention of the Innocence Clinic at the University of Michigan, prompting their involvement in the case. Simultaneously, the Michigan Attorney General's office initiated its own independent investigation. As both entities delved into the evidence, a significant revelation emerged. They found that there were several other hunter killings in the area, and it seemed like the work of a serial killer, a crucial detail that had not been disclosed to Titus's defense team during the original trial in 2002. Without any doubt, it raised doubts about any potential connection between Titus and the tragic deaths of Doug and Jim. These findings, coupled with other compelling evidence, prompted the Innocence Clinic to file a motion for a relief of judgment and a new trial on Titus's behalf. But the real turning point came in 2019, when Jacinda Davis, a 47-year-old esteemed producer renowned for her work in the true crime genre, stumbled upon her most captivating story. As she traveled the roads in search of inspiration for her upcoming series, The Killer in Question, her path led her to the heart of Michigan, drawn by the allure of Jack White's famed Third Man Records. Amidst her online exploration, a fascinating case of Jeff Titus caught her attention. Davis's journey intersected with that of Susan Simpson, a 34-year-old former attorney turned podcaster. Simpson, together with Rabia Chaudhry and Colin Miller, were the hosts of the acclaimed podcast Undisclosed. They met, talked together, discussed, and finally, Davis and Simpson found themselves embarking on a collaborative endeavor, uniting their narrative prowess to shed light on the enigmatic Titus case. The forthcoming season of Undisclosed, Simpson's podcast, was scheduled to be released on October 26, 2020. After it was aired, the audience was able to delve deep into the intricate details surrounding the controversial conviction and learn some things that were earlier shrouded in mystery. Simultaneously, on November 1st, 2020, viewers tuned in to the debut episode of Killer in Question, a compelling 2-hour documentary that aired on Investigation Discovery. While researching for their podcast and the series, Davis and Simpson found that something in the story did not sit right. Davis said, "I can't think of another case where there are two sets of detectives that don't agree. The original detectives in this case absolutely 100% cleared Jeff Titus and believe he is not guilty, and the cold case team is the opposite. They believe beyond a doubt that they have the right man." During their extensive investigation, they uncovered a significant breakthrough involving two crucial witnesses who had observed a car stuck in a ditch immediately following the gunshots. The fact that Helen Knopfs, a neighbor of Titus, could have easily identified Titus if he was in the car raised more questions. Since the driver turned out not to be him, It left them wondering about the stranger's true intentions and why he was in such a frantic rush to flee the scene. Could he be the elusive murderer they were seeking? To their surprise, the composite sketch that was generated based on Knopf's testimony closely resembled Thomas Dillon, a notorious serial killer active in Ohio. Dillon had a history of targeting hunters, fishermen, and outdoor enthusiasts. In fact, according to FBI reports, Knopf herself had even identified him from a police lineup when he was eventually apprehended in 1993 for the murders of other hunters. Filled with hope, both Simpson and Davis believed that their stories would encourage individuals with crucial information about the Estes and Bennett murders to step forward. As Simpson pointed out, the mere act of sharing these narratives often leads to a ripple effect, prompting individuals to come forward with valuable insights that can be incorporated into the ongoing investigation. Davis shared their sentiment, believing that people hold untold stories within them. She acknowledged that memories may change over time, with small details sometimes fading away. However, original recollections tend to endure. Naturally, as they delved deeper into the case, both investigators began forming their own opinions regarding Titus's guilt. Simpson, initially unimpressed by the evidence, discovered compelling corroborations that aligned with the initial conclusions of the case's original investigators. The evidence against Jeff Titus simply did not hold up. Since 2019, Titus's case has undergone comprehensive review by the Conviction Integrity Unit within the Michigan State Attorney General's office. As the investigation into this possible wrongful conviction continued, none of the motions submitted by the Innocence Clinic had been granted, leaving Jeff Titus behind bars at the Lakeland Correctional Facility in Coldwater Branch County, Michigan, where he had to serve 2 life sentences. In the face of adversity, the Innocence Clinic made efforts in 2021 to secure Titus's release from the facility due to the COVID-19 outbreak. With a significant number of inmates at Lakeland testing positive for the virus, they sought an exceptional circumstance release on bond. Unfortunately, their plea was administered by a district judge who deemed it unwarranted. Davis and Simpson, the podcasters, were the initial sleuths who stumbled upon a potential link between the 1990 murders and the serial killer Dillon. Their investigative instincts led them to uncover Dillon's dark past, as he had confessed to the chilling murders of 5 hunters and outdoorsmen in Ohio back in 1993. Additionally, Dillon had been a prime suspect in another killing in Pennsylvania and divulged to his cellmate about his involvement in the deaths of 2 hunters in a county that he believed law enforcement would never tie to him. Although Dillon met his demise in prison on October 21, 2011, his connection to the case presented a compelling lead. Driven by their determination, Michigan Innocence Clinic Director David Moran embarked on a mission. Making his way to the Kalamazoo County Sheriff's Office, Moran dedicated an arduous 6 hours meticulously sifting through the archives of the file room. With each document examined, the puzzle pieces began to align, shedding light on a potentially significant breakthrough in the investigation. As Moran continued his search for the truth, he unexpectedly found a special folder hidden deep in the archive. The folder was thin and held around 30 interesting pages. On the outside, it had the words "serial killer" written lightly in pencil. As Moran read through the pages, he became more and more convinced. These documents contained valuable information about Dillon and could be the key to their success in solving the case. What added another layer of astonishment was the realization that these vital documents had never been disclosed to the defense. It appeared that the prosecutor's office remained oblivious to their existence, leaving an unsettling gap in the knowledge presented during the trial. This discovery ignited a spark of hope within Moran, fueling his belief that their pursuit of justice was on the path to victory. According to Bruce Wiersama, the original detective who compiled the serial killer file, the reports concerning Dillon were included in the case file, and he strongly believed that Dillon was the perpetrator behind the crimes. On the other hand, Mike Werkema, the retired cold case sergeant, stated that he never came across that particular file. He and other detectives on the cold case team claimed to be unaware of the alternate suspect. However, A police report surfaced among court documents indicating that at least one of the cold case detectives had knowledge of the file. Stuart Fenton, a former Kalamazoo County assistant prosecutor, held a different perspective. He expressed his belief that Titus was responsible for the murders. He firmly believed that the jury made the correct decision and that an innocent man was not wrongfully convicted. In light of the recent allegations, Fenton opined that the newfound information would unlikely have altered the outcome of the original trial. During his time in prison, Titus made a personal vow not to trim his beard until the day he regained his freedom. When the long-awaited call finally came on February 16, 2023, informing him of his impending release, overwhelming emotions flooded over him. "I just started bawling," Titus recalled. Moments later, as he resumed his work on the cards, tears of joy would often well up again, prompting him to momentarily bury his face in his hands. However, Kalamazoo County Prosecutor Jeff Getting said that a decision has not been made about if new charges will be filed. He said, "We're in the process of reviewing the case. It is a complicated factual and legal analysis that will take some time to process." On February 24, 2023, 71-year-old Jeff Titus was released from prison after spending more than 2 decades in prison for Doug Estes and Jim Bennett's 1990 murder case. His conviction was overturned. Titus said that, "It's been 22 years waiting for this day, and it should have never happened in the first place. I'm just overecstatic and overjoyed to finally be out, where I can get out and do something. I want to see my grandkids. I haven't seen them. I want to see them." The moment of liberation from prison brought a flood of emotions that Titus struggled to put into words. As he stepped out into the free world, he was met by a supportive group of individuals who had played pivotal roles in his fight for justice. Attorney Moran, along with dedicated students from the Michigan Innocence Clinic, investigative podcasters Jacinda Davis and Susan Simpson, and the sons of the late Detective Roy Ballett, all stood by Titus's side during his newfound freedom. Detective Ballett, a stalwart believer in Titus's innocence, had passed away in January 2022, but his unwavering support left a lasting impact. While the cold case detective Werkema agreed with the judge's decision to release Titus from prison based on the lack of awareness regarding Dylan, he remained convinced of Titus's guilt. "I still believe Jeff Titus is the killer," Werkema asserted. "Considering his character and the actions he took, I believe he is the perpetrator. He is a dangerous individual, and I have apprehensions about him. I hope that now that he has gained his freedom, he will use it responsibly and make the right choices." With his newfound freedom, Titus engaged in activities he was deprived of for 2 decades. He immersed himself in the company of cherished friends and family, indulging in the food he had long missed during his absence. Rediscovering the joys of life, he enjoyed being with his grandsons, whom he had never met before, and even secured his driver's license. He said, "I can't express enough how grateful I am to be free and have the freedom to simply live again." Titus delighted in feeding deer and songbirds, and his artistic spirit remained alive as he continued to design and draw greeting cards. After almost 2 decades, justice was finally served to Jeff Titus, but the case of Doug Estes and Jim Bennett remained a mystery after the death of the serial killer Thomas Dillon. Do you think Titus was guilty of the crime, or was it the serial killer? Who do you think made a mistake in the investigation? The original investigators or the cold case team? Let us know your thoughts. Also, we would like to hear from you. If you want us to cover a case, please mention it in the comment section below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Until next time, stay safe.